welcome to the video. In this short tutorial, we're going to be looking at 3 very easy tips for writing a brilliant cover letter to help you book more interviews. Now, this particular course is going to be focused more on content as opposed to formatting. So we're not going to be looking at the structure you should have for laying out your letter or anything like that. We're going to be more looking at the content that you should be focusing on writing. And also cover letters, resumes and job applications in general are all intended to book you an interview. There's a popular misconception that a good resume or a good cover letter will get you a job. That's the end result of the process, but they really should be aimed at helping you get an interview, and that really helps you, or should help you, determine the type of content that should go on these documents to really help you stand out to book an interview. And despite what you may hear or read elsewhere, cover letters most certainly do get read. So as a recruitment consultant, I can tell you that I read every cover letter that I receive before reading a resume. Look, it doesn't on its own help me form an opinion about a candidate, but combined with a resume or other documentation, it will certainly help me make the determination as to which candidates I'm going to proceed to an interview with. So make sure that when you do include a cover letter, that it is very well written and that it covers off on more detail to best help a recruiter or a employer actually make the decision to book an interview with you. So with that in mind, let's move on to our first tip. The first tip that I want to share with you is that you should always explain how you can solve the advertiser's problem or meet their needs. Now, anyone that writes a job ad has a problem that they need to hire someone to solve. And the reason I know that is if they could actually solve the problem that they have without hiring somebody, that's exactly what they do, because it would cost them less in terms of money and time and resources, that sort of thing. And interestingly enough, most applicants that apply for a job don't specifically address what they bring to the table to solve the employer's problem. Now, a lot of people will say what experience they have, but they often fall short when framing that in relation to what the employer has said that they need on the job application. And the majority of cover letters out there are incredibly basic and give no real information that's going to help the reader. So by actually explaining how you can solve the advertiser's problem, you're actually seizing what is an absolutely excellent opportunity to stand out from your competitors. So the big question is, how do you demonstrate that you can solve the employer's problem? Well, the good news is that your resume will do most of the heavy lifting here, but you want the cover letter to give an incentive for the reader to read your resume. And you can do this by focusing on telling the reader about your experience and skills that are only relevant to their needs. And you can find that out from the job ad, the position description, or any other documentation you may have, or you might have even called the employer or recruiter to find out a little bit more about the role before you apply, which can sometimes be quite useful. So make sure that there's no waxing lyrical about any irrelevant skills and experience. What I mean by that is, if you're, for example, going for or applying for a position as a Java developer for a company, talking about your years of experience programming with Visual Basic or Delphi, for example, might not be the most relevant skill set that you should be talking to the employer about at this point. You should probably keep it focused on Java, and if you don't have the Java programming experience, we're talking more about the software development lifecycle that you've been working in, your customer consultation, that sort of thing. And wherever possible, make sure that you back up your relevant skills and experience with results. Now, this is a great tip for both a cover letter and a resume. But for a cover letter, what that might look like is something like this paragraph. In my current role at XYZ Widgets, I relationship manage 30% of the business's client base and have increased my portfolio's revenue by 40% in the past 12 months, resulting in an additional $130,000 in gross revenue. So as you can see from that statement, you're saying what you've done, what sort of success that you have achieved in terms of a percentage, but then also showing, well, what that's actually translated to in dollar terms. So that's as a salesperson, for example, but you can sort of tweak similar paragraphs to just about any type of role that you might have done in the past that's relevant to what you're looking for with your new prospective employer. Now, the second tip that I want to share with you is that you should show that you have done some research. Now, if you're applying for a role directly with an employer, you should always do some research before applying. Now, if you're applying for a position via a recruitment agency or a headhunter or an intermediary like that, you might not know who the employer is, which will make doing research very difficult, if not impossible. But when you are applying for a role directly with an employer, you should certainly jump online and do a little bit of research about them. Talk to anybody that you know that has worked for that particular company, if you do know anyone, and just find out a little bit more information about them. Because by demonstrating on your cover letter that you've done some homework before applying can really serve to highlight you as a serious candidate for the position. And in doing that, you want to focus on why you want to work for this specific company rather than one of their competitors. And that's not to say that you should say, well, I want to work for you because of XYZ is just an ordinary company from what I've read from the reviews and you sound better. It's more lining up your core values with theirs if you can. And by mentioning the company by name in the middle of your letter, it'll almost certainly draw the reader's attention. So putting all that together, you might have a statement such as, before writing this letter, I wanted to learn more about XYZ widgets, and from my research was incredibly impressed with the number of positive customer reviews that I've found online, as well as with the business recently being certified as carbon neutral. So that really, it shows an alignment of values in terms of the carbon neutral, shows that you've done some research, that you've looked at some positive customer reviews, and that's left you with a good feeling. They'll like to know that people are actually looking at those reviews as well, because that's obviously good for business from their end. And you're providing something meaningful rather than just an empty statement about, I would love to work for XYZ widgets, I'd love for you to consider me. So it's actually something more meaningful, and you're telling them a little bit more, and you're showing yourself off to be a bit more diligent as well, which will always stand you in a good light with a prospective employer. The third and final tip on this video is that if you're using a template letter, please make sure that you update it. There's nothing more off-putting than errant documents with old dates, incorrect subject lines, etc. Recruiters and employers are not just reading what you write, they're often forming an opinion or making a preliminary assessment on soft skills that you might have, such as your level of attention to detail. So if you have a lot of mistakes on your cover letter, or that you haven't updated it from the last job you've applied for, that may actually be more telling than the content that you write. Whereas if everything is up to date, the employer's not going to notice it as much, so it's more of a neutral score, and it all goes back to the content of your letter from the first and second tips as an example. Now, any applications that I receive personally as a recruitment consultant that are addressed to, say, other recruitment agencies or haven't been updated or contain spelling mistakes are almost instantly discarded. And look, I think it's fairly safe to say that most of my colleagues in the recruitment industry around the world, as well as employers, probably share a similar view on this and would discard applications like that for the most part. So here are some simple ways that you can identify and remove mistakes from your cover letter. One handy trick is to proofread your letter once, fix any errors that you find, then do something else for an hour or two at the very least, and then come back to your letter and read it again. You might be very much surprised at what you find in doing this. Ask a friend or family member to proofread for you. It's amazing just what a difference a fresh set of eyes can make when proofreading. And make sure that you save as and then save often. One common mistake that people make when they're updating any sort of document is they might fail to continue saving their document, and they'll perhaps save it then as a PDF or do something to it which will revert it back to an older version of that letter, or a version that's not been updated, which will mean that it will go out to the employer and will have incorrect subject lines, be addressed to the wrong person, etc. So that can happen. So make sure that you keep saving as often as you can remember to, or whenever you update something, just to avoid any sort of embarrassing little mistakes like that happening. So in closing, remember your cover letter can be much more than a basic letter to introduce your resume. In fact, it should be much better than a basic letter to introduce your resume. Give the reader an enticing statement about how you can solve their problem. Whenever you're applying directly to an employer, make sure you do some research on the business and make a statement that shows the reader that you've really done your homework before sending in your application. And finally, remember to check the letter closely for any errors. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.